From Nevada seek recognition.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 171, printed in Part A of House Report number 118-559, offered by Ms. Titus of Nevada.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1316, the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this vital amendment to prohibit funds in the bill from being used to acquire, use, sell, or transfer cluster munitions in an effort to avert more widespread harm to civilians in areas contaminated with unexploded ordnance. Cluster bombs are not winning weapons, but indiscriminate munitions that blanket large areas, contaminating land, and inflicting disproportionate harm on civilians. Cluster munitions are shells that contain dozens of smaller bomblets that disperse into the air and scatter over areas the size of several football fields. Their lack of precision targeting capabilities increases the risk of their falling into civilian areas and makes it very difficult to decontaminate those bombed areas. The extreme threat to civilians, furthermore, that these weapons pose far outweighs the potential military benefit. The 2023 Cluster Munition Monitor Report found there were at least 1,172 new cluster munition casualties globally in 2022. That's the highest annual number of casualties since at least 2010. In 2022, civilians accounted for approximately 95% of all cluster munitions casualties. And of that 95%, children accounted for over 70% of the civilian casualties. Thousands of communities across Southeast Asia, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe face lingering dangers from landmines and explosive remnants of war dating back to World War II, the Vietnam War, and the Indochina Wars, with many of the Pacific Island nations still contaminated with unexploded ordnance following World War II battles between Japan and Allied forces. Laos, the most heavily bombed country per capita in history, has suffered an estimated 50,000 civilian casualties from explosive remnants of war since 1964. Cambodia and Vietnam have seen over 64,000 and 105,000 casualties, respectively, since 1975. The 2008 Convention on Cluster Munitions has 112 party states and 12 signatories, including the majority of our NATO allies. The transfer of these weapons by the U.S. is contrary to the global norm against the use, transfer, and stockpiling of cluster munitions. There is a reason why the vast majority of the international community has banned these weapons, and it's time for the U.S. to do the same. I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Ukraine is in a fight for its survival, and artillery has been a critical part of that in its defense. Cluster munitions fill a much-needed gap until production of 155mm rounds can catch up. We have a shortage of those rounds. The Russians have been using cluster munitions for over 2.5 years, since the beginning of this conflict. We should not limit Ukraine's ability to respond in kind. Moreover, the amendment goes beyond prohibiting the transfer of cluster munitions to Ukraine. It would tie our hands in future conflicts, prohibiting the option to use these munitions in contingencies where the only other option are larger munitions that suffer even more casualties. Additionally, it's not hard to imagine a situation where we might need to transfer these munitions to other allies and partners, such as Taiwan or South Korea. We should not impede our own defense or that of our allies and partners with a complete prohibition on cluster munitions. I urge a no vote and reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. The gentlelady from Nevada is recognized.
May I inquire how much time is left?
The gentlelady has 2 minutes remaining.
At this time, I would yield 1 minute to the chair, the ranking member of the subcommittee.
The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. In the case of Ukraine, I continue to remain concerned that allowing these munitions to go onto the battlefield undermines our moral authority and places the United States in a position that contradicts 23 of our NATO allies who have joined the Convention on Cluster Mines. I want to be clear, though, I'm a strong supporter of the Biden administration policy in Ukraine. And this is a difficult position that the Ukrainian military has been put in. Yes, Russia has used these types of munitions inside of Ukraine. So when we were short on delivering the security that we promised Ukraine for help, cluster bombs became something that the administration put in the mix. I wasn't supportive of that, but I do realize that this is the choice between the lesser of two evils in the war that Ukraine has been faced to fight because of the Russian invasion. So I want to get to a place where we don't have these choices in front of us and that we are not transferring these weapons.
The gentlelady from Nevada reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
I thank Chairman Calvert for yielding me some time. I rise today in support of a cluster munitions prohibition amendment. We've heard from members speaking in favor of this amendment, and I'd like to echo their concerns from a military perspective. Cluster munitions do kill innocent civilians, but they also are incredibly deadly to U.S. military personnel as well. The vast majority of cluster munitions lack a self-destruct capability and have failure rates from 2 to 40%, with many of these war-torn nations unable to adequately address their own UXO clearance operations, often due to a lack of having their own EOD-trained personnel. This is where the United States military steps in. Through programs like the Humanitarian Demining Research and Development Program and Humanitarian Mine Action Program, the U.S. Department of Defense sends highly skilled EOD personnel to provide demining assistance to partner nations post-conflict. This means that even if the United States is not directly involved in a conflict, we send America's EOD personnel into harm's way when they conduct clearance operations. President Biden has provided Ukraine with cluster munitions for use against Russia, and anyone would be a fool to believe that when the Ukraine-Russia conflict is over, American EOD personnel will not be sent to assist in post-conflict clearance operations. On my last visit to EOD Memorial Wall at Eglin Air Force Base, I reread the names of 344 fallen EOD technicians. If we don't support the cluster munitions prohibition amendment, we'll be adding more names to that wall. As a founder and co-chair of the Congressional EOD Explosive Ordnance Disposal Caucus, it is my duty to be a voice in Congress for America's EOD personnel. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and with that I yield back.
Gentleman from California reserves.
Final point I would make, the dud rate on the Russian cluster munitions, exceeds 30%, where the dud rate with the U.S. munition is extremely low. It's a terrible weapon. War is a terrible thing. And these weapons are necessary for us to have our allies win. And so I would ask that we defeat this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I thank the gentleman from Arkansas for pointing out the danger of these weapons, not just to the victims, but also to our old troops. As far as the dud rates go, the Department of Defense has indeed stated that DPICMs have a low dud rate, 2.35%, as the department has said. This figure, however, does not tell the whole story. DOD tests the dud rate by dropping bomblets on a concrete surface. Obviously, every little bomblet will detonate on concrete, but that's not representative of the environments where they are deployed. When cluster munitions are dropped in mud, snow, marshes, and certain soft terrain, that dud rate skyrockets, upwards of 50%. The DOD's announced dud rate figure cannot be taken at face value, and constructing an argument against this amendment solely based on that foundation is truly flawed. I just point out again the damage that is done to humanity by these weapons, and the majority of those who are casualties are children. And I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Nevada. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Nevada seek recognition?
Recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Nevada will be postponed.